weirdest dream last night. Remember that guy who used to host The Apprentice? I dreamed we elected him president.
Que nem o pai, nem você, nem eu.
The 31-year-old foreign minister has called for a tougher migration policy.
Are you ready?
I will never be silent. You will not be able to stop.
Nem szabad.
This country is not free because the ruling majority constantly abused power with its two-third majority.
The sun has risen on an independent United Kingdom.
And condemn the anti-Muslim rhetoric and hatred that we are hearing, and say no to those who promote this hatred, and to make certain that we create an America that works for all of us.
The Varieties of Democracy Institute creates the world's largest data set on democracy. Their annual report for 2019 shows that although democracy is still the most prevalent political system in the world, it has been in decline for the past several years. Many countries are undergoing what they term a third wave of autocratization. That means that states are moving away from full liberal democracy The Institute identifies several global challenges for democracy. Freedom of expression and of the media, they say, are under attack from government forces. Also, that freedom and fairness in elections are declining in more places than they're improving. The report sees that a rampant distrust of opponents, or what they call toxic polarization, is on the rise. And finally, the report claims that the digital age has enabled the greater circulation of disinformation. These changes have been punctuated by a seemingly radical shift toward the controversial right-wing populist leaders and movements, like Brexit, like the election of Donald Trump in the US, and Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Hungary's Viktor Orban. There's been rising support for far-right populist parties in Europe, including the French National Front, led by Marine Le Pen.
Moi, présidente, le rétablissement des frontières sera mis en place dès le lendemain de ma prise de fonction.
The Austrian Freedom Party, the Dutch Party for Freedom.
I rather would have no Quran at all, as we, in Holland at least, have outlawed Mein Kampf.
The list goes on. Many observers have expressed shock at the change in the trajectory of the world's democracies. The question I want to deal with is, what has enabled the global rise of populism? Why are many people in democratic countries choosing to support leaders and parties that are eroding certain democratic freedoms with their authoritarian rule? What is it about these authoritarian leaders that has captured these voters? What do they find attractive about candidates like Donald Trump or Jair Bolsonaro? Why are people not repulsed by the openly bigoted rhetoric of some of these candidates? To try to answer some of the more detailed questions, let's start by answering a more fundamental one. What is populism? Norris and Engelhardt, in their book Cultural Backlash, Trump, Brexit, and Authoritarian Populism, define it as, quote, a form of discourse about the first-order principles of governance, delegitimizing established power structures and the role of elected representatives in liberal democracy, while claiming that the people should rule. In other words, populism is about taking the power from the hands of the so-called elites and placing it into the hands of the people directly. Engelhardt and Norris, as well as other authors like Moffitt, see modern populism as a political or rhetorical style, as opposed to governing policies. Moffitt emphasizes the role of populist leaders as performers above all else. In their book, Engelhardt and Norris differentiate between two types of populism: authoritarian populism and libertarian populism. Authoritarian populists prize the values of conformity, social conservatism, loyalty, and security.
We will build a great wall along the southern border.
Libertarian populists, by contrast, focus more on individual autonomy, tolerance, and social liberalism.
It is time to end religious bigotry. It is time to build a nation in which we all stand together. Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, all religions.
This raises the question, why is there a sharp uptick in authoritarian populist support and seemingly not as strong a base for libertarian populists right now? There are a number of examples of left-wing or libertarian populists running for office and a few actually in office, populists who talk about socialist ideas like monitoring base or universal health care. I would argue that there are a few key factors that have helped place the authoritarian populists into the spotlight more and more. One is the increasing personalization of politics. Combine that with the appeal of the performative populist style or personality and the current media landscape, and you have the basis of a powerful trend. Diego Garzia has written an article titled "The Personalization of Politics in Western Democracies: Causes and Consequences on Leader-Follower Relationships." In it, he argues that over time, there's been a shift towards placing more emphasis on political candidates themselves across Western democracies. He offers some impressionistic evidence of the shift. The fact that campaigners now use images of the candidates instead of party symbols during election campaigns, or the fact that the media often mentions the candidate names over their party affiliations. Garzia uses the words of Rahat and Schaefer to further explain his proposition. He believes that personalization of politics implies that, quote, the political weight of the individual actor in the political process increases over time, while at the same time the centrality of the political group, i.e. the political party, declines. Garzia hints that the cause of this personalization could have something to do with the fact that many political parties have tried to transform themselves into, quote, catch-all parties, meaning that the party ideology has taken a backseat in an effort to attract support from a wider spectrum of voters. Attracting a wider spectrum of voters has in turn led to more emphasis on the personal appeal of their candidate. Traditional cleavage politics, or politics based on differences in core values, has declined. Garzia also emphasizes how the advent of television has contributed to the personalization of politics in the West. Suddenly, the personality and appearance of a leader could be broadcast to masses of potential voters at once. For example, the 1960 televised American presidential debates are credited as giving John F. Kennedy an edge over Richard Nixon in an extremely tight race. In the first debate held in Chicago, about 40% of Americans tuned in to see the two candidates go head-to-head in person on key issues. Nixon infamously appeared washed out in a gray suit, looking a bit ill and tired. A tanned Kennedy, on the other hand, looked healthy and handsome.
I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights.
The Nixon campaign had tried to paint Kennedy as inexperienced compared to the two-term vice president. However, as Nixon sweated profusely, Kennedy appeared calm and commanding. Television allowed regular citizens for the first time to fully assess the character of the person they were voting for based on their appearance, expression, and body language, rather than just their tone of voice. According to Garzia, it was really only after the advent of TV that personality traits could be used as, quote, shortcuts to assess a candidate's suitability for power. The second of the three factors propelling the rise of authoritarian populists is their unique personality type, or more accurately, their common style of expressing themselves. As Garzia suggested, since people are likely to use personality traits to judge a political leader, the authoritarian personality must be attractive in some way. So, what are the main characteristics of the populist personality or style? In an article from 2019, Alessandro and Ferran, Martínez y Coma say that previous scholars have convincingly argued for three different personality types that populist leaders fall into. They say that other scholars have usually pegged populists as either charismatic leaders, provocateurs, or, my own favorite, the drunken dinner guests. The charismatic leader type of populist is said to use a dynamic and emotional political style to relate to their supporters. When executed effectively, this style can help instill confidence in the ability and credibility of the leader. The agent provocateur type of populist is one that makes a spectacle of themselves or intentionally provokes others. The goal for this populist is to gain attention by breaking social taboos. The final construction of the populist persona that Nye and Coma see is the drunken dinner guest. The drunken dinner guest takes on a negative tone and doesn't worry about offending others. They express their convictions in what could be considered a more lowbrow way. Benjamin Moffitt explains what appears to be his own version of the drunken dinner guest in his book, The Global Rise of Populism, Performance, Political Style, and Representation. He says that populists often display bad manners. In an effort to ingratiate themselves with the ordinary people they claim to represent, populists will use a coarser tone or curse, use slang, and revel in being politically incorrect and over the top. Their goal is to differentiate themselves from the overly composed, rigid elites. They do things that would get them written about in tabloids.
O filho começa a ficar meio assim, meio gayzinho, leva couro, ele muda o comportamento dele.
Eu fui num quilombola em Eldorado Paulista. O afrodescendente mais leve lá pesava 7 arrobas. Não fazem nada. Eu acho que nem para procriadores serve mais.
This sort of behavior puts populists, superficially anyway, on the same level as the common people. Of course, at the same time, it's kind of insulting to the common people. Through their own empirical research, Nye and Coma have found that, to some degree, modern populists exhibit characteristics from all three types of populist personalities. But there isn't much question that populists who exhibit the most provocative behavior get the most attention. And there's a sound underlying reason for that, one that relates directly to the nature of modern media. This bad manners style of populism is especially well designed to thrive in our modern media environment. This is the third of the three factors that I argue have been driving the success of authoritarian populists. Moffitt argues that populists, among all the common types of political figures, quote, most effectively marry the tendencies of media logic with the central processes of political representation and decision-making at present. In the digital age, mainstream news, tabloid websites, YouTube, Twitter, and forums like Reddit all dominate the public sphere. This is where millions of people go to find information about a candidate or simply read the news. Since the internet is so saturated with information, content makers need something to pull viewers in, something to make them click. Thus the advent of the term clickbait. Titles and articles online that qualify as clickbait often simplify messages in an attempt to shock the reader into clicking and reading. Even mainstream television news relies on headlines to, as Moffitt terms it, simplify and intensify stories. Moffitt believes the media logic of our time is designed to dramatize and polarize, in doing so, prioritizing conflict. To him, this is the reason why bad manners populists have been able to gain so much attention globally. The conflict between the people and the elite that is intrinsic to populism satisfies the media's need for a dramatic, conflict-driven story. On top of this, Moffitt says that populist bad manners make great copy due to the media's desire to personalize, stereotype, and create emotional drama. This is where the needs of the populist politicians and the media converge. Within the blogosphere, Moffitt notes that populists can recruit supporters more cheaply and effectively. A viral video can be more compelling than an expensive television ad. Blogs like Twitter can help by spreading memes about candidates. On the internet, the people are able to express themselves and engage with events in real time. But, as Moffitt says, quote, this immediacy also discourages reflection, fact-checking, or the gathering of information. Finally, he asserts that the anonymity offered by the internet allows witch hunting and online flame wars to develop at viral speed. In this video, I've argued that the increasing personalization of politics globally, combined with the particular bad manners or drunken dinner guest populist personality, have led populist leaders to thrive in the current media landscape. This means that reaching people via media platforms is easier than ever for authoritarian populists. But that does not answer a fundamental question. Why have these newly visible populists found widespread and increasing support? What is it about their message that has struck such a resonant chord in so many people? Different authors have theorized about the reasons for authoritarian populism's large support base. The idea of a post-democratic world has been thrown around by many authors. Campani and Pajnik, in their article Democracy, Post-Democracy, and the Populist Challenge, find Colin Crouch's explanation the most useful for the modern context. Colin Crouch is an English sociologist and political scientist. He believes that a post-democratic society can be understood in the same way as one understands a post-industrial society. A post-industrial society is not a society without industry. People continue to produce and to use the products of the industry, but the energy and innovative drive of the system have gone elsewhere. In the same vein, quote, a post-democratic society therefore continues to have and use all the institutions of democracy, but it closes them more and more in a formal shell. To Crouch, our society is now ruled by, quote, executives of multinational corporations, big businessmen, and bankers. These elites are able to operate beyond the reach of democratic institutions by using their money to influence politics. On top of this, economic liberalism has created an unprecedented wealth gap between the 99% and the 1%, or the richest of the rich. In a world where the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer, it isn't surprising that the disenfranchised might be in search of a leader who promises to take power out of the elites and place it back within the people. Pippa Norris and Ronald Inglehart, on the other hand, present a theory of cultural backlash to explain the rise in authoritarian populism. They believe that many are leaning towards authoritarian populists in order to protect themselves from immigrants who they believe transgress community norms. They assert that their findings suggest that long-term intergenerational population replacement has made an older generation of social conservatives feel that their values are threatened. This has led them to support leaders who flout the new norms of tolerance. There doesn't seem to be enough evidence to either wholly refute or wholly support either the post-democratic or cultural backlash theories. While these theories attempt to get at the underlying reasons that individuals have for supporting authoritarian populists, the personalization, personality, and media model that Moffitt and I support gets at why now, of all times, we are seeing a shift. The personality and media model is important because it explains why and how underlying public sentiments are even able to be drawn upon in the first place. It is because of the mechanism of the media, the way the information spreads around the world in a matter of seconds, that authoritarian populists have an edge. Let it ring.